Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage journalist Sam Cooper from the Bureau to moderate a conversation with Doug Schweitzer, Alberta's former Minister of Justice and Solicitor General, Danny Fournier, Manager of Illicit Trade and Prevention with RBH, and Sat Parhar, Chief of the new Alberta Sheriff's Police Services.
This is you. I think. Oh, you got it? Yeah. Okay. There you go.
Everybody left?
Yeah, no. Few people still finishing off lunch, so we'll save our knockout.
Dessert is served.
We'll save the knockout punches for 5 or 10 minutes in. But seriously, thank you everyone for joining us. We're at a obviously pivotal and important time for Canada and Alberta. Trade, fentanyl, tariffs are in the headlines. No matter where you come down on those issues, it will be important to Canada's future how we address the problems with transnational crime that it's widely recognized now at its worst is linked to hostile state activity. And so I've been working this summer on a number of stories demonstrating how Canada's dated laws and I'll say right away, some poor leadership from Ottawa are leading to problems with the Americans who say they cannot work and cooperate with our Canadian police forces and justice system. So just in the past few weeks, I broke a story about, some have heard of the clandestine Falkland Super Lab just over the Rockies, tucked into the Okanagan region in a mountainous area. 10, 15 years ago, people would find it hard to believe that the cartels and international state-sponsored organized crime are involved in clandestine labs with fentanyl. The story that I broke, the nub of it was that Ottawa denied a request to work with Washington in 2022 when the embassy, the Americans came to Ottawa and said, we know about precursors from China coming into Vancouver. Will you work with us? Essentially, they were shut down. A story last week, another one. Again, the Americans said they have been seeking to work with Canadian police for about 6 years. People would find it hard to believe that Canadian commercial trucking is used at scale to pick up drugs from the Mexican cartels in the southern United States, run it back up into Alberta and Ontario. And even though Canadian police did join some investigations because of our dated laws, they tend to fall apart. So this is where we are. I want to start with the question, if you agree with me that Canada's laws are dated and our police forces and justice system are not working at a reasonable level with the Americans, what do you think the holdup in Ottawa is? Why no political urgency to deal with fentanyl if it is a real issue? Do you want to start, Doug, as a former justice minister in Alberta?
Well, I'll take it from the lens of having been in the chair, being a justice minister, and when I was there, we also had policing under the same umbrella because we had the Solicitor General role as well. And there's a few different ways that particularly a conservative justice minister can look at their file. They can either look at it as a shield, they're on defense all the time saying, hey, we're just putting out fires of the day, or they can see it as a sword and something where they can actually drive an agenda. And I think in order to do that, it takes more risk, though, from an elected official perspective. So we actually have to be bold when it comes to our views as justice ministers saying, look, I'm going to have an opinion. I'm going to advocate for what's right in society, and I'm not going to say no for an answer. We took that approach particularly, I'm not sure if people remember, but when rural crime was like a huge issue, but it was only being talked about in rural communities across the prairies. We went out and did a big rural crime tour. We listened to people. We gained political momentum for that particular topic to get it onto a national agenda. We're starting to get national coverage at that point. But it takes a sustained effort of an elected official at a provincial level to make a dent in an issue like this one. But with that political leadership, and then giving the police the cover they need, at least in their own jurisdiction and province, to say, look, I need a task force on this. I want to make sure that in Alberta, we've got a task force on the ground that's focused on this particular issue. And there's going to be some other folks talking about policing here on stage, but if the police make a mistake, if you want them to be bold and take bold action, the elected officials have to have their back as well.
Well, let me just ask, yeah. Indeed. I mean, being in the news media and now independent, I'm finding that there seems to be a lot of denials from Ottawa that Canada really does have a cartel problem or a fentanyl problem. And so how could the public get behind needed reforms if it seems to be in the media we're hearing that this is unfair criticism from Washington? So maybe I'll put each of you on the spot. Sat,
Sure.
There literally is a new sheriff in town in Alberta, and you're the guy. You have a lot of experience in law. Do we have a fentanyl problem? Do we have a transnational crime problem in British Columbia, Alberta, Ontario, Quebec, and the other provinces?
Well, absolutely. First of all, nice meeting everybody. Yeah, I think we do. I know we do. I was the deputy chief of the Calgary Police Service for last 5 years of my career. And I retired in 2019, and it was, just look in Calgary, just walk through Calgary. You tell me there's not a problem with drugs and addictions, and that's not a Calgary issue. That's right across Canada. And I remember when I was part of the opioid crisis that was going on in Calgary and started mostly in Alberta and BC. I was talking to my counterparts in California, and they didn't even know what fentanyl was back then. Right? It was just making it, and I think, I know for a fact that the cartels and whatever organized groups, they're the quickest to cash models, right? So what is the quickest way for us to get to cash? And fentanyl is an easy way to get to cash. It's easily made, it's cheap, and it's very addictive. So but it's just one example of all the other drugs that are out there. Whether you're talking about meth or you're talking about cocaine, these things, they clasp onto people, and it's truly impacting, and we can't be blind to this. And let me make this clear. I'm going to shake the tree. This tree in this province is going to get shooken a little bit. We're going to do things differently. It's clear those issues are driving families. There isn't a family out there that's not somewhat impacted by someone that's addicted or not feeling safe walking through your downtown core or not. These are things that we have to get ahead of, but it starts with government. It starts with being supported by government from the provincial. I need the province, but the feds make they're a big piece of this. I will work with them, but I'm going to be pokey on this. I'm going to poke them.
We'll get into what Alberta can do, but Danny, do you have a perspective, being in law enforcement, of course, from Eastern Canada, how I'll frame this is, as a reporter in Vancouver, I was at the epicenter of the heroin epidemic. You could not walk through the town without seeing literally people dying in the streets. 2013, as a young reporter, I was there when fentanyl hit Vancouver like an avalanche. And now my impression is it's rolled out across the country. From where you are in Quebec, do you have a sense of that spread?
Yes. Just from the beginning, we're mixing, or you're mixing, or trying to mix law enforcement and politics. Doesn't make for a good mix at all. So across the country, fentanyl is an issue. To set points to organized crime, the commodity is irrelevant. They're in the money-making business. Now is fentanyl. In 2 years from now, it might be a different commodity. But to them, they know how to exploit our weaknesses. They're very speedy to market. In the commercial sector, we say speed to market all the time. Our regs, our laws, and our enforcement cannot follow that fast a pace. How do we fix it? I have ideas. I'm afraid I don't have solutions for you. But yes, throughout the country, it is an issue. There's nothing new really from the law enforcement community. We took with Braden, we took a reporter to the border when the hype was big, when the fentanyl crisis, and I said, you're not going to find much new at the border. There's a joint task force there. They work well together. The hype was politically created, which is never good. If you're a police chief and they ask you, will you take 2 helicopters and 100 more men? It's like asking your dad if he wants a new tool for Christmas. Sure, I'll take it. But if I can't prosecute those cases, which I guess we're going to get into, or if the court system cannot absorb all of that extra, that extra volume of cases in court, then it becomes a moot point. But yes, prevalent all across the country to different extent. For the older, well, I would say like us, because I see a few gray hair in the room, like me, it's hard in Montreal to hear public health officials say we're going to open up more safe injection centers, but their thinking is based on the success model of BC. And I'm thinking, have you been there? I mean, I was there when it first started 30-some years ago, unlawfully or unregulated, and this is what you're basing your model on. I mean, you don't want to rub it in their faces, but it's a huge difference in perception, in education and awareness. They don't know what they're talking about, really. I understand they mean well, but they execute poorly.
Right. So I think our audience would appreciate digging into the point that you brought up, and we're very well positioned. So before we get into the legal weeds on what is holding us back, look, Thomas Creek, the Canadian Association Chief of Police, said that association has been pushing Ottawa for now 20 years and telling them Canada's laws are 20, 30, 40 years dated compared to these international, transnational groups that are now targeting Canada because we have weak laws. So we'll get into that, but first, you talk about politics, you talk about law, maybe our audience will remember there was a controversy between Premier Smith and Premier Eby, I believe, that safer supply quantities, I believe up in Prince George, the RCMP, the local RCMP came out and said this safer supply is being pooled and is being trafficked cross-province. And then there was a big controversy over that. I believe the RCMP backpedaled, indicating to me that perhaps they're getting some political pressure from above. But let's start with Sat. Can you speak to, do you believe that government-issued safer supply, no one is going to deny that we want to save lives, but is the program working, and is that product from the government coming into Alberta from BC?
Good question. With all humility, as the deputy chief back in the day, I told myself as I took on this new role, I'm not going to change. I'm not going to be manipulated or change who I was or where I came from. I know that I was the face of harm reduction for the Calgary Police Service, and in hindsight, I should have challenged some thoughts. And I think harm reduction and safe supply is good to a point. If you don't attach treatment to it, you don't attach all those other things. I just spent the last 5 years in the private world in mental health and addictions and leading that challenge. If you don't provide some layer of treatment, this isn't the police responsibility, but we can be part of the influencers. I know from talking to frontline police officers, they're struggling all day long, and what does safe supply mean, and how can we arrest somebody that we feel is a criminal? Let me tell you, crime is like water, the path of least resistance. So whether you want to talk about borders, if they're going to plug the southern end of the United States, if the northern end is the path of least resistance, they'll come to the north. And that's alive, that's happening. When we talk about harm reduction and we talk about treatment and these things that are going on, it's the concept of taking drugs or government-provided drugs or stolen drugs and being able to go somewhere and use them safely, and then we think we've done our job. It's just wrong for me now, and I won't join that. You have to provide treatment, and that's where all our systems have to start working closer together. And I've seen some failures in that. And as a result, you see some brutal things that are going on in town. I always talk about, if you're a citizen and you're walking in your downtown, you guys have seen the person that's on meth that's standing on the street corner just hunched over, right? And you think to yourself, that was a family member. But if you were to take that person and you were to create if you were to give them clear eyes and an open heart, and they were to see themselves sitting there, what do you think they would want? Would they want us to leave them there, or would they want us to pick them up and get them some help? We all know the answer to that. We play a role in that. government plays a role in that. So I will stick to those principles as we move forward. So harm reduction, so getting back to your question, safe supply, that's just not the solution for me.
Doug, again, this is a hot ball.
Yeah.
It could explode. Look, I mean, was safer supply, that is BC government-issued drugs being taken by organized crime and brought across the Alberta border.
I mean, I can't speak to the specifics of that. I mean, I'm no longer in the chair
Yeah.
where I have access to that type of information. But I will say, though, that I do believe that Alberta's charting a new path in Canada. It started with the Premier Kenney and the administration there, where we expanded the reach of drug treatment courts across all of Alberta. Historically, it was only really, really micro programs to help addicts get through the court system. We only had them in Calgary and a little bit in Edmonton. Now we have them in all of our mid-sized centers. We've expanded, beyond double the capacity in our major cities. And then, Premier Smith, to her credit, I mean, the fact that they're being proactive, saying these people lack capacity to make decisions for themselves, we're going to make sure that they get the care that's compassionate for them to hopefully allow them to make reasonable decisions for themselves going forward. I think that's going to obviously go through the courts. There's going to be challenges, but it's a fight that's worth having.
Right. So let's tackle the issue of the legal impediments in Ottawa at the federal level. I've reported a lot on getting into the weeds. There's something called the Jordan Law, where the Crown, that is the Ottawa prosecutors, have to get a case through in a pretty tight timeline. So problem one, these are transnational, sophisticated, international organized crime. Often the police will be collecting WeChat messages and have to have translations of volumes of Chinese messages. On the other side, law enforcement has to deal with laws that the Americans, Australians, the Brits can't understand. It's called Stinchcomb, where essentially the RCMP have to dump out every piece of evidence they collect. And this can lead to, leaking information about confidential sources. And it's widely understood that this is an inhibition for the RCMP to work with the American agencies, FBI, DA, Homeland Security, to the point where the Americans are saying, we know about your labs in Western Canada. Can you work together? The RCMP is saying, no thanks, because they don't want to be exposed in court. Some say there's a bit of an excuse and lack of political leadership going on that, and some say these legal impediments are a very real issue. Maybe we'll start with Danny. What do you think?
Well, they definitely are a real issue. They are a concern. And if regarding Stinchcomb is a good, I'm not too worried about Stinchcomb. We've been working with Stinchcomb for 20 years. Stinchcomb has provisions within it where you can not disclose lawyer-client privilege, informant privilege, related privileges, or investigative techniques. There's a way to do it, but I think the cornerstone of all that lies on prosecution. Depending on how aggressive or passive your prosecution service will be, makes the whole difference. The same piece of evidence under Stinchcomb in the province of Quebec, a prosecutor might say, never am I going to give you this piece of information, ever. Same piece of information in BC, for example, might be disclosed. So there's no uniformity, there's no, the approach throughout the country varies depending, technically, if I take Quebec out of the equation because they have a provincial prosecution service, it's the same federal prosecution service, but it lacks stability. So I'm not too worried about Stinchcomb. Jordan is a game changer because it forces police services to act different now. It will tie into the Bill C2, giving law enforcement extra tools will mean their investigations are going to move quicker, maybe resolve faster, therefore ending up in court quicker. But if they still can't absorb that volume of cases, then it becomes a moot point. So from my perspective and my experience I've had with both Jordan and Stinchcomb, I think we can work with. Jordan is a serious concern.
Doug, what's your perspective on that?
So I got to live this life when I was in justice. So when I came in, we replaced an NDP government, which had put in place a triaging protocol for prosecutions. And one of the big campaign commitments that we made was that we're going to hire a small army of prosecutors, and we were going to deal with this challenge. And when I went to my department and said, okay, how are we going to hire X number of prosecutors, they came to me and said, they don't exist. They don't actually have senior criminal lawyers that live in the province of Alberta that we can hire into those roles to meet the capacity that you are seeking. So then we actually had to drill down into it. And when you think about the size of the government of Alberta's legal team, so this could be from the civil side as well as the prosecution side, you're talking about the largest law firm in Alberta, period. If you look at what the law firms in Alberta, the big private law firms, they'll hire between 20 to 30 articling students every single year to replenish their ranks and bring in new lawyers to make sure that they can service their clients. When I asked the government of Alberta how many young articling students we were hiring, the answer was 3. And it's like, okay, well, how are we ever going to replenish? And they wouldn't guarantee them jobs after their articling year. So I'm like, how are you going to attract talent? How are we going to get people into our mid-sized centers? And how are we going to get them into rural communities? So we reformed that and said, look, now we're going to hire 20 articling students. We went from 3 to 20, and I'm like, yeah, we're going to figure out how to mentor these young people, because if we're ever going to deal with Jordan, we need more capacity of prosecutors that are going to be able to handle that volume. And governments do an insufficient job of replenishing that ranks, particularly in criminal law.
So Sat, maybe you can attack this from both sides, speak to the federal laws, and in your new position, are there innovative ways, realistically, provincially, that Alberta can take up the slack if Ottawa is as weak as my reporting has shown?
I hate to pick on groups, because I'll tell you that the hardworking women and men out there trying to get these prosecutions together and trying to get cases together, nothing is more demoralizing than having a piece of legislation or having a system that's above them, get cases tossed. It's a very hard thing for them to, it really does take the spirit out of them, because they're trying to get bad guys off the street. And when our own systems are getting in the way, it's a very difficult thing for them to understand. And our goal as leaders is to make sure that those things don't get in their way. And so when I see what's going on, when I see things like the Falklands case, when I see lack of information sharing, when I see lack of collaboration, when intelligence models aren't built collaboratively, that you're actually sharing information quickly without putting up hurdles and roadblocks. I've been in policing for 35 years now. That is the #1 issue that has happened in Canadian policing. We do not share information well. We do not collaborate well. I was the liaison as the deputy chief with the FBI, the DEA, and all of them. And we would have regular meetings talking about our cases, and the information sharing was really good from a municipal level. Mm-hmm. The gaps were at the federal level.
Can you speak to that? Because this accords with what I hear from my American sources, some of them very senior. They say, we go to Ottawa, we have great meetings with the senior bureaucrats, we're going to work hard at this fentanyl and the cartels. And then nothing happens, nothing changes. And they do say, we prefer to work with, I won't name names, but some provincial forces and some municipal forces.
You bet. Well, I would say, and no disrespect to Doug, but you want to say no, get a lawyer involved. So this is what happens, right? So that you can find a reason to not share. That's not the way to look at things. You have to find a way to share. And there have been times in my career where I worked on counterterrorism, national security. I was on that committee for Canada, and there were some really good information sharing models there, because that had to happen, right? Because there's some real significant things going on that we had to share. But if you asked most agencies that I worked with back from the United States, they would rather come get information from us than anywhere else.
So you're the new chief of sheriffs. Do you have enough authorities? Do you want to be the chief of Alberta Provincial Police? And what's your vision? Can you move the needle back?
Is this a cone of silence?
I cannot guarantee that what you say will not leave this room, unfortunately, but I want you to push the limits.
No, what I would say is that anybody in policing would understand that if you want to create change, you have to control it. And I think this is no disrespect to the RCMP or our federal policing partners or any other partner. I'm a Canadian, but I'm a proud Albertan, and for us to control our destiny, we want to manage our wins and control our mistakes, acknowledge the mistakes and fix it. I think the less influence we have from Ottawa on things that are at the national level in doing that, we'll do better. We'll still make mistakes. But the reality is that's just the way it is. No agency is perfect right now. But yeah, do I think that Alberta needs to move in a place where we can control our own? Well, we have a great example here from Quebec. Quebec's got their own provincial police. I would suggest, I haven't asked him this, but I'm going to suggest that he thinks that's a better model than having the RCMP do your provincial policing.
And I would just add to this as well, like, it requires some political will. Like I made this point when we were chatting before we got on stage, is that right now, if the police services across Canada feel as though the elected officials are just going to throw them under the bus or use them as the scapegoat for, you know, the topic of the day, they'll stay back and say, we'll just keep the peace. We're going to take a very conservative view as to what we can share, can't share, whether or not we're actually going to enforce the law and remove an illegal protest or not. We're just going to sit back and maybe we'll go get a court injunction. Ask the lawyers to solve our problem for us. Versus having an active political message from political leaders saying, no, we expect the police to do their job. We expect collaboration. We expect them to do this with our American counterparts. Yeah. If that message is there at the elected official perspective, the police services are going to have the cover saying, the legal team has their view, but this is a reasonable interpretation. Now we're actually going to do it.
Exactly.
So Danny, maybe you can speak about the wins that you think the Quebec Provincial Police got, and then pivot into how could Alberta innovate, even before, if they do get a provincial police force, even before that time.
Yes, a few comments. There's a way to do both. You could be more proactive, more assertive, and more autonomous in your enforcement, and still have the RCMP or other partners with you somehow. Again, it's not a criticism against the RCMP. From my perspective, we've had good relationships with them, still have today, even within the private sector. East may be different from West, not maybe is. So from that perspective, my experience has been overall good, but at one point in time in between RCMP, Municipal Police Services, the Americans, you'd have to step up and be like the kid caught in a custody sharing agreement. I love you both equally. This is what you have to say to them. I'm not going to pick sides. Here's what we're initiating. You're welcome to join. At times, the RCMP or others would say, we can't tag along on this one. It's fine. We'll just go do it. But you have to have the ability to do it. If this is where you're pointing towards, I'm sure it will work. To your question, Quebec has had a good business model from law enforcement, and it is rare that you can mix the two, business model and ROI, return on investment, on a law enforcement agency. Usually it's just an expense account. But Quebec has good examples on working, fixing the prosecution to some extent. I think it used to be better. It's not as it used to be, as good as it used to be. But to give you an example, under provincial tax infraction, for example, on contraband, either cannabis or tobacco, the provincial program funds the enforcement task force, which has today an ROI of, for each dollar invested, they bring in $10. Mind you, this is not lottery, this is not liquor store, this is enforcement. Still, they rack in money and revenue to the province because they act under the Provincial Tax Act. With this, we fund prosecutors. So you're not going to end up at a prosecutor's office saying to you, oh, I can't take your case, I'm so sorry. Well, you don't want to remind them they must, but we pay for 8, 12 positions in your office, so they'll take it. So that discussion has gone away. There are effective business models from a law enforcement perspective to make things work. I would say to new police services beginning, focus on the serious stuff. You've got gang-related violence, gun violence, serious drug trafficking. Find partners to do the other stuff. It could be provincial partners. They could be under the Provincial Tax Act. It is a good business model in the province. There is no reason for it not to work in Alberta. Sitting here is easy to discuss this, but the program in Quebec has been 20-some years in the making, so they got a head start. But I was there when we started the Contraband Tobacco Enforcement Unit. A humble start, 1 team leader, 4 detectives. Today, it's 154 resources, full-time under the SQ's governance, plus every peace officer in the province can enforce the Tax Act. So it's a great model to work with, trying to find which is serious so that we say, okay, police, you need to take care of this. Don't want to say there are less serious crimes, but we went to DSQ. We actually have an MOU signed with DSQ on certain things where we ended up saying, you can't afford it. There's no way you can tackle that. Let us do this. Online monitoring is a good example. Online illicit trade. Focus on child pornography online. That's serious. Let us deal with contraband tobacco or other stuff being trafficked online. Anyways, we probably need a whole conference just on that, but there are effective ways to do it. There are good business models that work. Quebec has a few of them.
Well, that leads to, you know, what you can accomplish with public, that is, police and private partnerships. When an industry sees that their product is being cannibalized by these international Chinese, Mexican networks. And so people would be surprised. I've done stories where the Mexican government complained to Canada that 12% of their 12% of their legal tobacco market was being taken by counterfeit tobacco produced on First Nations lands on the border of Ontario, Quebec, and New York State. So think about that. I believe there's something like 150 organized crime groups on those lands, under-policed, lots of challenges. The Mexican cartels, working with the Canadian bikers, have set up factories. They have tractor trailers. And again, this, you know, counterfeit, getting into a legal market with illicit goods feeds the profits that can buy those precursors from China, meth, ecstasy, fentanyl, and ship them into Vancouver. So maybe each of you could give the audience a little sense of how that, you know, those two markets, legal and illegal, come together and then undermine, you know, the legal economies of our provinces. Sat, do you, or?
Sure. The one thing I would say is, to start is, like, I'm not going to villainize our national partners. They're trying their best. They're doing their best and trying to be part of something, and they're taking on so much. And policing and law enforcement is trying to manage, you know, small communities up to large, organized, you know, cross-border crime. Like, so it's such a wide gamut of things that policing is trying to combat. And I think sometimes, so when I talk with the RCMP, and I look at what their role is, if they did their role at a national level really well, when we talk about cyber, we talk about counterterrorism, we talk about things that are cross-border, those are the things that would really benefit every aspect of what's going on within our communities, right? Within, whether it's small, I mean, the Falklands is a small town, right? And, you know, they're targeting those places that's the easiest to do crime. So I just need to say that only because I think it's important. It's an important message that if we focused on the places that they were really good at, and we create those collaborative models, I think that's a really good place for us to start. It just takes moving people off a position, and we have to take people out of this idea that this is what they've always done. Listen, if we were so traditional and we were so traditional in what we do, I wouldn't be sitting here today as the chief of police. Right? We have to transform. My daughters wouldn't be police officers. We're both police officers in Calgary. And, you know, these are things that we have to start moving with. So this idea of private partnerships, cybercrime, think about cybercrime. The real experts in cybercrime aren't police. They get trained by the police for private corporations to hire them. It's only their passion on solving crime and that type of crime that keeps them in policing. But really, we have to find models where we work collaboratively with our community partners. If we don't do that, we're just going to always have this wall around us that we think, and that it's time for those walls to get lowered a little bit.
Doug, do you have a sense of how the province can use its power of taxation on illicit goods, and in that way, if prosecutions aren't where they should be yet on these international groups, can that be a tool?
Well, I think the biggest thing is that you have to make the political case, you know, with your colleagues at the Treasury Board level. So you actually have to have political will. So if we're going to tackle this issue as an Alberta-centric strategy, you know, the folks that are in the chair, so, you know, Minister Ellis or Minister Amory, you know, together have to go build consensus. You know, they have to go hear from the community. And if it's, you know, the barometer on it's, you know, number 10, they may not get brought up to the top of the pile because there's always a constraint of, you know, resources. So I think the biggest thing is like if this is going to become a huge issue for our American counterparts as they've articulated, then they need to make sure that they make that case to their colleagues saying, look, this needs to be a top 3 issue for us. And then if they do that, then they actually have the political will and buy-in from their colleagues, say, yep, you're going to have the resources that you need to be able to set up a designated unit, to be able to work through, maybe it's the Treasury Board and Finance team as well, through Minister of Finance to say, look, we're going to make some tweaks to how we approach this as well and collaborate across ministry. One of the big challenges of government is that it's one thing if you're trying to move a policy agenda in one ministry, the minute you bring in a second ministry, your chance of success is like below 50%. You bring in a third ministry, your chance of success plummets to like maybe 5 or 10%.
It's just competing priorities?
It is. It's competing priorities, the stars aren't aligning, like it's very difficult to move a policy agenda beyond one ministry. So you really have to have that buy-in from the top in your team that this is going to be one of the issues that political leader is going to drive. And if you approach it that way, then you can actually have some success at that level.
Well, if we look at the United States, again, hearing from some senior people, they say there really is a whole of government effort to stop fentanyl deaths. And I don't know if dropping a missile on a boat in the Caribbean from Venezuela, some people may think they're going too far, but they're not joking around. So, I mean, Danny, do you have thoughts on that? How much can a province do in an international world on this issue?
But these topics are often urgent because they're in our faces. Go back to the province where I'm from again. From a contraband perspective, again, commodity is somewhat irrelevant. The province has invested in education and awareness 20 years, 25 years ago, whereas the problem may seem less serious today, but from a law enforcement and government perspective, you're dealing in urgency. We need not to forget education and awareness to build that the new generation knows about these things and conducts themselves accordingly in a better fashion, if we will, than we did at their age. So from a provincial perspective, I would say it's as important, if not more important, to invest in education and awareness as it is to invest in enforcement. How do you balance the two? We leave this to the politicians. I don't know how to do that. But if you do not, or if you underestimate the power of education and awareness, you're always going to be putting out fires. I call it putting out fires. Was brought it a short story with DSQ on a round table on guns trafficking because there was this sequence of gun violence in the city. In the private sector, we have this upstream approach. We leave usually downstream to law enforcement because on a day-to-day basis, it's more on the downstream of the illicit supply chain. We try to focus our efforts upstream. So they bring me in on this round table and I go, they ask me, are we missing anything from an upstream perspective? I go, yeah, gun violence, who speaks with Smith & Wesson and Colt and Glock? And they all look at one another. I go, you're putting out the fires. You have murders. You have to investigate them. You need to have this tougher discussion at a higher level upstream. If every family in Detroit can buy a gun for $500 and sell it in Calgary for $5,000, you're always going to be putting out fires. Easier said than done. Sitting here is easy to discuss this. But you need to have that tough discussion upstream, because if you never stop the flow from upstream, that's all you'll be doing, investigating, arresting people, but you need to raise that education. How do you do it? It's easier said than done again, but you need to have that discussion. We do it to some extent in the private sector, and I see them, when I saw that large table, CBSA is there, RCMP, they're all looking at one another. I know SQ wants to say, it's your mandate, RCMP, you're federal, I'm sitting there, so I guess they were shy or did not dare to do it, because I go, no, someone needs to take the lead. I don't care if it's the RCMP or the municipal police, but you need to have that discussion.
So, Sat, I know you've said more than once that you don't want to poke Ottawa or the RCMP in the eye, but what message would you send on, you representing a new, let's call it a policing body? How can you work together better with Ottawa?
Well, that has to happen. There actually can't be a way for us to do this correctly without working well with our partners, and Ottawa and the RCMP are key partners. And I've already had lots of discussions with the RCMP on what does it look like for us to transition as the police and these types of things. And we're a ways away from that, but I will say that we can start modeling this in this province. on what success looks like. And I'll go on Premier Smith's comments. This is the can-do province. You want to pick a province? This is the province that's going to do it. And I will tell you that we'll do it collaboratively, we'll do it kindly, but we are that province. And I think this window is ripe right now. This is a window that's open. I think the federal government, my feelings are the federal government might be wanting to move a little bit away from what contract policing looks like. So this is an opportunity. Everything seems to be aligning right now. But nothing can happen unless we do it together. And this is why I go back to this idea of we have to get people off their position. This is not a positional argument. This is any police officer with any type of experience will tell you what the best model would look like. So we'll work with them. We'll work with Ottawa. We'll work with the RCMP, and we'll work with every other agency out there, the CBSA with our border stuff, with the czar from Ottawa. We'll work with them. This has to be that way. This isn't the time for us to fight. It's kind of our time. Well, we're going to fight as Albertans, but we're going to fight for the right thing.
If I can build up on what Seth said, I have seen an openness from the RCMP recently, maybe by obligation or by default, I don't know. But regarding training, for example, we trained, I think, at RBH over 2,000 police officers last year, probably half of that RCMP. For the RCMP to come to the private sector to get training on contraband tobacco, you would have never seen this 15 years ago. There's this gap in experience, I guess, or in knowledge. So they were open enough to admit they have gaps, to come forward. It's not ideal, it's by far anything but perfect, but we see this openness in my neck of the woods anyways. So to your point, to make a long story short, I think the timing is right. They're in a position where they must find a way to make it work.
That's been pretty widely discussed within policing circles, that there's been a recognition that the RCMP, whether it has updated laws that it can work with or not, needs to look at a more federal focus and can't be spread out across municipal and provincial contracting. Would everyone agree that, what would that look like if they were to make the change? Or I'll be a little cynical here, will we just do the Canadian thing and say, I think we need to change, but just talk about it and not make it happen?
One easy thing to start with, which is that a dead angle we have right now and we underestimate, is online criminality. So there, aside from child pornography, terrorist monitoring of potential threats, terrorist threats, there is not really any sustained presence online from law enforcement agencies, except for these couple of exceptions. So if you speak about drugs trafficking, guns trafficking, contraband, cannabis, tobacco, drugs, and regular drugs, there's no need to go on the deep web and the dark web. You just Google them. You'll find someone on an online sales platform that will be willing to sell you fentanyl or cocaine. So that's where I say find partners. They could be provincial, they could be federal, they could be private. Going back to our model where we monitor, actually the intention was to monitor tobacco products. To give you an example, in the past 2 years, we've removed ads on online sales platforms for contraband cigarettes, only talking the category of contraband cigarettes, over 14,000 ads. Even the SQ could not have tackled half of that. Mind you, each of those ads is a distributor. Technically, there's a criminal infraction. There's a tobacco tax infraction. You could go after them, and that's when we approached the SQ. At first, they were conflicted. They said, well, my mandate is to arrest people and charge them, and I can be an ass sometimes and say, well, you can't afford it. How will you do that? The approach is, let's shut them down online. Not charging anyone. We're stopping the infraction, not the individual, which is a tough pill to swallow if you're law enforcement. But when you look at the numbers, you say there's no way you can tackle it. Let us at least do something. You get visibility on things, you get to see trends coming. It's better than nothing.
Doug, let me ask you, I'll get you to stretch a bit here. You talked about building the public consensus in Alberta to get behind justice and policing initiatives and getting wins. So if you were going to counsel Ottawa on what they need to do to get some momentum on turning back these transnational crime groups that are undermining our country now and our communities?
I'd start with the fact that I have a hunch that most folks in this room didn't know that illegal tobacco was a huge issue coming into today.
Yeah.
I would have a hunch that most folks, is it on your radar? Is it on your day-to-day? People know about fentanyl. People know about people with addictions downtown. They know about Donald Trump saying, look, we need to have Canada take some issues here with fentanyl. Like they may have some of those things on their radar, but day-to-day, tobacco, illicit tobacco, and the connection to organized crime, probably not on the average person's radar. So I think if this is going to be a part of your talk track as an elected official to gain momentum and consensus, similar to, I'd take the same approach that we did with rural crime. I actually had to make it relevant to people in the big cities in order to gain consensus and political will to be able to take that to other provinces and then say, look, we're going to take this and become a national issue. So if there's that political will saying, this is our strategy for how we're going to influence the United States, this is critical to Alberta's future, we're going to win on this issue, you have to have an elected official that owns it with the mandate of the Premier saying, own this issue, and then they have to not only win that narrative at the local level, but then start building up momentum with their provincial counterparts to the point where the federal government can't ignore 6 of the 10 provincial justice ministers and public safety ministers saying this is one of our top issues. So when they come together as a group, it gets up the radar.
Sat, what are your thoughts?
I would say that taking over these types of roles, like provincial police, we can learn a lot from the RCMP. The RCMP have been doing this for many, many years. Maybe not perfect, but they've been doing it for many years. We can learn lots. What does it take to, police remote areas and places that are in northern Canada, northern Alberta? These aren't easy things to do, and so there's got to be different ways to look at these things. So even rural policing, for example, there's probably ways that technology can come into play a little bit more than what's been happening. So I think there's the biggest issue going on in policing right now from an internal kind of a structural kind of perspective is recruiting and retention. It's a tough job right now, and getting people to get into a profession where you have lots of people that want to attack you and defund you and do all these things. It takes a little bit of spirit out of you, and I think we have to have the support of government to say we're going to support our law enforcement. We'll get our staff. We have to get staffing. There isn't an agency across Canada that isn't struggling with getting people. Now, getting people to work in Northern Alberta might even be harder. But if you recruit from Northern Alberta, they might like it. So we have to think about those things. And how do you retain these people in those positions? So you have a sustainable model that's not where people aren't moving all the time and transferring all over Canada. I think we have a better solution than that. But these are challenges for us in policing. But we'll do it.
I'll put you on the spot again and swing right back to you. If you could talk to President Donald Trump and tell him your vision for change in Alberta, what would it be?
I'd say, I think Premier Smith's on the right track. I'd say that she's leading this province in the right way and showing what leadership means for this province. And I think other places can learn from owning our stuff. It's funny, we have border services, and it feels, I've always kind of joked, it's like having 1/3 of a dam, right? It's like water is sweeping by you, but you've got this little thing in the middle trying to stop stuff. But it's showing that we're paying attention. We're paying attention to the cross-border issues that are happening here. Let's not be naive. There's lots of stuff that's going on across borders, legal drugs, guns, humans. And we have to be on it, and we have to support each other, and that happens through good collaboration. And if we're always going to make them, no matter if it's Trump or put whatever face you want on it, if we're always going to not work well because we don't want to share information, we're just getting our own way, and we have to get out of our way.
So let's end with this thought, and if you can find a silver lining, please do. In my work, I've been focused on getting to the bottom of how organized crime from other countries is moving across our cities. This has become the focus of my career, and I think over the past 10 years, it's accelerated. Doug, you mentioned not everyone gets how, 30% of tobacco in Alberta may be illegal, may be connected to cartels, possibly 50% in Ontario. So let's say this, if we don't get behind some changes, what does the dystopian future look like 10 years from now? We'll do that across the board, and then we'll say, how do we what's your one takeaway that we need to change to avert that dystopian future? I'm saying it will be very dystopian if we don't change.
I just think, number one, you have to have borders that are strong. You have to have borders where you can control immigration, full stop. Like, if you don't have that, you don't have a country. If you can't control that flow. And control of goods going across that border is equally important to how people move across the border. That's one thing. Another thing, too, I mean, if this issue continues to accelerate, I saw some of the stats showing that it was 15% of the product maybe 5 years ago were illegal tobacco, moved up to almost 30% here recently. If that trend continues, the notion that tobacco products, there's an economic concept that we could just put more taxes on it because the buyer only has one distributor, and we can continue to tax it and increase it because we have healthcare concerns. It may no longer be that inelastic, elastic conversation when it comes to a good. There could be a way as well to go after it from that pure economic lens. People are likely buying it because it's a lower price point. So you could go at it from an economic lens as well, just looking at it from pure cost of goods as well. So there could be a broader discussion that needs to happen. Is it an inelastic or inelastic good anymore in tobacco?
Danny, what does the next 10 years, how bad could it get if we don't change?
Well, it's not going to get any better soon, I'm afraid. I think that your point is very valid. Controlling movement is key. In your position, you need also to control east-west movement. You're the gateway to BC, and you're the gateway of the stuff coming west to Eastern Canada. Unfortunately, if I take contraband as a commodity, comes from out east. A lot of it goes to BC, and you're stuck in the middle of it. You're stuck with, and you're unfortunately dealing with, what may look like inactions of other provinces. If Ontario and Quebec are very laxist with the manufacturing of illicit good, you're ending up with not your fair share of your fair share, or not your fair share of the problem, but a big portion of problems that initiate from other provinces. So controlling the border is key. Controlling movement is key, especially east-west. We call it the pipeline. There's a pipeline training for law enforcement officers where we teach them how to identify traveling criminals. Fairly straightforward and simple, but our Alberta is right in the heart of it.
So Sat, you get the last word again. Maybe you can flip from the dystopian to how to avert the dystopian vision. Again, I'm saying, coming from Vancouver, in the epicenter of the heroin and fentanyl death zone, I'm seeing it spread across the country, and I'm not seeing it slow down.
Well, let me start by saying that organized crime is alive and well in our country. It is, the worry is that they get smarter and start to learn things, to do things better. And if that happens, then we're going to be in more trouble. The other thing that elevates us too is that there's cross-border things that are going on. There's people that I know of locally here in our elderly that are being hacked from people in Russia and in the States and all over the world. So what are we doing to help support? What are we doing to help support every person out there in a fair and equitable way? Like, whether you're in rural Alberta or rural northern Canada, how is it that they're getting the same services and support that major cities are getting, or whatever that looks like? So I would say that that's our challenge in government and in policing, is to make sure that we're tackling that. I worry about the cyber world a lot. I think that that's the next big thing that's going to, it's already here, but it's going to, if organized crime really gets a grasp of that, then we're going to be in more trouble. I think to get past this thing, to get through all this, it's only through good communication, good collaborative models, good intelligence sharing models, and opportunities to action those models. If you don't, you can talk all day long. First you got to talk. First you have to collect intelligence, and then you have to be able to act on it. And if we stop ourselves from being able to do that, we'll never get ahead of it.
All right, so let's wrap it up, and we'll thank Doug, Danny, and Sat for, we've talked about some dark issues, but we have also, I believe, raised some innovative solutions. So thanks to the audience too for following along. And yeah, I do think this is probably one of the most important, if not the most important, issues facing Canada. Thank you.